What's good, fire starters? Welcome to the first episode of Into the Fyre, a podcast where we talk about the psychological and mental health issues that are plaguing the artist community right now. I'm Alex, and I want to open your mind to what really goes on under the hood of creatives. Let's go. So, one other passage by Thomas that stuck out at me was he said that the fact that those who die by suicide experience isolation and withdrawal before their deaths is among the clearest in all the literature on suicide. And one thing that Avicii did when he retired is that he I think it was Madagascar. He went to he got a place on an island and spent the last 2 years pretty much there. They showed him riding an ATV, hanging out on the beach, playing guitar. Looked like an amazing, nice, beautiful, pleasant life he was having, but in reality, he was tormented, really. But he was isolated and withdrawn from society. And the fact that Thomas said that those who die by suicide experience this isolation and withdrawal before their deaths. It's the clearest in all the literature on suicide. That was the one thing probably that Avicii shouldn't have done. Granted, he needed to get away from all the madness and whatnot, but to completely go off the grid was a very, very bad call. And so I don't know. It's kind of like makes me feel like the pit in my stomach, because I don't want to say that if he had not taken that exodus into going on an island pretty much by himself, that he'd still be alive if he didn't do that. But it's tough to stomach. So yeah, I mean, really, this is a big deal, that bringing it back to a wider scale. 30,000 people die by suicide in the U.S. each year. 80 people per day, one person every 18 minutes in the U.S. Worldwide, it's 1 million people die each year, one person every 40 seconds. So this rate means that more people are dying by suicide than in all the world's armed conflicts combined. Fuck. One thing that stood out to me in the book as well is that when Thomas was at his dad's funeral, he had come into contact with another man who was a little bit older, but he had noticed something about him that really stuck out, is that he was very happy and lived a really happy life and was really socially involved in his community and other people around him. And one thing he did was he had a habit of calling at least one friend a day just to talk to him for a few minutes. And that this individual worked at initiating and maintaining friendships, and this seemed to sustain him. And Thomas says that indeed, if more people did this, he would predict a decrease in the overall suicide rate. And so it's kind of silly, but after reading this, I now try to at least talk to someone once a day on the phone, which sounds stupid when I say it, but nobody likes to talk on the phone anymore. But I think it's super healthy. And if there's one thing I think y'all should start doing, is call someone, talk to someone once a day on the phone, even just a few minutes. Be like, hey, how's your week going? Like, what are you up to this weekend? I think that's super healthy. Another thing that kind of stood out, another little vignette, I like the little tidbits in between the lines. And Thomas said that compared to others, depressed people may engage in less head nodding during conversation. Head nodding is a gesture affirming connection that communication partners find rewarding. I don't know. I find myself, at least the day after I read this, I was like more consciously head nodding when I was talking to people. But yeah, like, okay, like if you're talking to someone and they're like deadpan, right, and they're not nodding their heads, it sounds silly, but that should really be an indicator that they perhaps might be depressed. And real talk, like I was depressed back in the day, and I could recall myself not really head nodding, kind of just staring at them, listening. So yeah, if there's a little tip off if one of your friends is maybe depressed, if they're not nodding their heads when you're telling them stuff, it could be indication. Thomas goes on to say, of all the anxiety disorders, panic disorder has probably received the most attention with regards to associations with suicidality. And you could tell in these documentaries that Avicii and Kurt, they would panic when they had to go up on stage. They did not want to be in the limelight. Avicii especially. He's a composer, a producer at heart, and it's not exactly the life he wanted. And so I think another thing that I might want to take from this episode and reading this book and watching these documentaries is that a lot of you guys, a lot of music producers want to be main staging, want to be on Ultra and EDC, but A, is that really what you want? And B, if it is, are you ready for it? Are you mentally, emotionally ready for that type of life? And everyone would be like, sure, of course. Are you kidding me? Yeah, I want the fame. I want the money. I want the chicks. But there's so much more to it. That it's a life that many are just not prepared and probably wouldn't want after doing it. And so, yeah, I think that music producers who like break into the scene, they should be like ready for it. Their mind should be right. Their head should be right. And so I want to look into that in future episodes too. Is that, everybody wants the money and the power and the fame, but do they really? Because as music producers especially, and a lot of creatives, we're introverts. I've always been an introvert, and majority of us are introverts. And so and that's what Avicii was going into. It's like, you're asking an introvert to be crazy and extroverted, right? Like yelling in the microphone and jumping up and down and, doing all the great things that a touring DJ should do, but it's not you per se, and it wasn't Avicii. You could tell, like he's an introvert. He was a guy who liked to be in the studio, composing his amazing progressions and melodies, and not so much like superstar, throwing cakes DJ. And so he was just kind of out of place. And that's another thing, is it becoming a touring DJ, for a lot of people, you have to act different than yourself. And I think that's a major issue, and really why he started drinking so much, I believe. And getting into drugs is and I've been there. I've totally been there, where I've never been the kind of a outgoing, party-going type of guy, but when I was sort of thrust into that scene in college, drinking kind of helped me become that person. And I totally understand in that regard what Kurt and Avicii, Tim Bergling, if you want to tell him by names, went through, even drugs. So it really hit home. Not only because these guys I idolized them, but I could really understand from a characteristic and personality perspective of what they were going through. And Thomas goes on to say that people who experience this form of panic disorder are so concerned about experiencing panic attacks that they rarely leave their house and thus experience extreme reductions in social contact. And I know that watching the Kurt Cobain documentary, he actually didn't want to leave his house. Like when he was first getting into his career, he didn't like leaving his house, and this isolation, this wanting to be isolated, that really, I think, led to their decisions. Avicii, he didn't want to. He wanted to be on that isolated piece of land in Madagascar, and it's just that if you have a friend who is isolating themselves, or has kind of suddenly just wanted to be by themselves, please. I'll go into this a little bit later in the episode, but that should be a red flag. Substance use disorders definitely confer risk for suicidality. A review of the literature on alcohol abuse and loneliness revealed that alcohol abusers have experienced more loneliness than do members of most other groups. And because suicidal people are depressed, Thomas says the symptoms of oversleeping and overeating are unusual among depressed people. Usually depressed people lose their appetite and have insomnia. I will never forget seeing that one picture of Avicii, I want to say, emaciated. He had lost so much damn weight, and everyone's like, what the fuck? He had, got a really short haircut, so skinny. And I mean, I was like shocked at his appearance, and I think that should have been a tip off that something was seriously wrong with Avicii. And I'm not saying that we failed, but it was the signs were there. So there are ways to treat this, not just treatment prevention, but to treat it. One successful form is interpersonal psychotherapy. And Thomas says that if a major interpersonal issue is connected to a symptom onset is worked out, say a grief problem or a hostile standoff in a marriage, then that is bound to help relieve symptoms. Interpersonal psychotherapy recommends a sensible strategy of staying focused on one interpersonal issue, trusting that progress made on it will generalize to improve other areas too. So during a session of interpersonal psychotherapy, a group leader reviews each participant's depressive symptoms, and participants describe recent events and link the events to their mood. The group leader then facilitates supportive statements and suggestions for change from other group members. And what's really important here is that the therapy is very effective. Among those who received the treatment, rates of severe depression went from around 90% before treatment to around 6% after treatment. That is extremely successful for treatment. And so I didn't want to, bog you down with this stuff because it's kind of, long-winded, but IPT, like if you're experiencing some of the symptoms that I've talked about, or you have a friend who may be experiencing these symptoms, everyone's like, oh, they should just reach out to a hotline. Yeah, hotlines are good, but they really need to engage with professionals, with therapists, with people who will talk with them one-on-one. I mean, the hotline is a start. Don't get me wrong. I used to be a crisis counselor myself. I've talked people down from suicide over the phone, but it's when there's actual therapy done. I mean, I think that's something that needs to be engaged with more, because people who are suicidal tend not to reach out, even if it's anonymous over the phone. They're probably not going to take the first step. So that's why it's important that you guys do take the first step and helping your friends, your family that you see who might be in this situation, and contacting the therapist and trying to arrange a meeting, perhaps a group meeting with all three of you, some sort of intervention. But it's really important that you notice these signs and that you can help out those who are not going to reach out by themselves. You know what I'm saying? Like, they need a helping hand. They don't want, they already feel a lot of shame and guilt and burden. The burden that they are to others, and that why, as a suicidal person, why would you want to burden someone else with your problems, like even if it's over the phone, anonymously? So they're going to tend to not want to do that. So I just really feel it's important that we as a people step in and take action on their behalf. And so I want to go back to that CDC article that just came out, and Dr. Ann Schuschat said that there are simple steps that anyone can take to help someone at risk of suicide. She says, beginning a conversation, helping keep them safe, helping them connect, and then follow up with them. We don't think every single suicide can be prevented, but many are preventable. In the article, it says research shows that the decision to attempt suicide is often made quickly in an impulsive way. You may be thinking about it over time, but that moment when you actually make an attempt is a very short window. He explains, if you could make it harder to make that attempt by not having access to the means, what happens is the feelings will pass. It gives people time for someone to intervene and get them help. So that is a really important preventative step that can be done, and there's good research to support that. Suicide researchers already know a lot of the information in this new report, says Gebbia, but the public does not. He points out, for example, that the nation currently has no federally funded suicide prevention program for adults. This is super important. I could not believe when I read this that this is actually true. But the United States does not have federally funded suicide prevention programs for adults. This is the third leading, killer in the United States, on the rise. And we don't have any federally funded prevention programs for it. That is massively alarming to me. We can't expect a major public health problem like this to be addressed unless we see the investment. That's a massive deal. And I hate to say it, and I don't want to get political on this podcast, but with who's in office right now, I don't see, it's sad, but I just don't see funding for this coming to light. So that's why I feel I can make an impact by providing this information to you guys, providing the signs and what you can do, and that you do have an impact. Don't wait for our country to create these federally funded prevention programs that are probably not going to come about for at least the current presidential term. There's things that we can do as a people to help out and prevent this from happening. And so Thomas ended his book with a really awesome passage. I'm going to read it for you. He says, theorists and scientists who work on suicide are often asked why they have chosen their field of study. Isn't the topic morbid and depressing? My answer is probably predictable by now. There is nothing depressing about working to prevent and relieve the kind of suffering that my dad, my family, and millions of others go through. This alone is enough of a reason to study suicide. But there are other reasons still. Artists and writers, for example, have long understood that the dysfunctional and moribund can inform us about human nature, including what is positive and good. Extreme states and conditions, including suicidal crises, have the potential not only to illuminate the nature of those experiencing suicidality, but to inform us about human nature in general. There are general psychological phenomena that may be invisible in the absence of dysfunction. The need to belong and to contribute in some way to society seems to be an essential part of what it means to be human. And that's what it comes down to, is that if we don't feel that we belong with others in our community and that we're contributing in some way, we lose our humanity and we lose to the reason to live. And so I just want to really, stress that, even if I'm not saying that you are suicidal, but if you've ever felt depressed or anxious, just down on life because you don't belong, you're not contributing to society, get out there, contact people, make friends, call someone every day, be more engaging in your community. And this is something I'm probably going to go into in another episode, but get off your fucking cell phone and get out there and make friends and contribute to your community and your society. Like just being a kind person and being a social person and being kind to others. And I know it sounds kind of fluffy, but that's the start that I would take, because I've been in the situation where I isolated myself. It was after a breakup of like 7 years, and I just didn't leave my house. I was really isolated and really glad I got out of that funk. Actually moved to Los Angeles because I had to get out of that funk. But it could have gone really, really bad. And I got to the point where I knew that it wasn't it for me, that there was more that I could give to the world, and that we're all unique. We all have our strengths, our weaknesses, but we all have something to give to the world. We all do. And that sounds so corny, but it's true. We all are different. We're each and every one of us, we have something different to bring to the world. And I knew that, as down and out as I felt, I knew that there was a fucking sixth gear. And so, I made the move over to LA here, and things are amazing now. But I've been at a really low point. And so there are many things that reading this book, reading this article, and watching the documentaries really hit home for me. And I've been there. And that's another thing, is that a lot of professionals, a lot of people in the mental health industry, I believe that if you can help someone most if you've been in their shoes. And I don't think a lot of mental health professionals have been alcoholics, or have had substance abuse issues, or have been depressed, or dealt with anxiety issues. And I'm probably going to illuminate this more in future, but I've been there. And I feel like through this entire podcast experience in these weeks, these episodes, I've been in the shoes of a lot of these issues. And so I feel like I can help you guys out a lot. So I hope you get a lot of value out of this episode. And the whole point of this is that I really just want to, leave no stone unturned, right? Like everything that needs to be fucking talked about and discussed and figured out about mental health, I'm going to do my fucking best to figure all this out. So every week I'm going to read a pretty influential book in the psychological space and apply that to musicians and creatives and try to help you guys out, because I have this perspective as a psychologist and as a creative, where I feel like I can provide you guys with a lot of value. And I listen to a lot of podcasts. One of them was the Jocko podcast. I listen to a lot of Tim Ferriss too, but Jocko podcast changed everything for me, because he's this like badass Navy SEAL that like did like 3 tours in Afghanistan and got like all these medals. But he just has this approach about him that is so inspiring and motivating. And if there's anything I want to express to you guys, it's his type of approach, his badassness about it. But also at the same time, he's incredibly smart and intellectual and thoughtful. And so I'm kind of, taking a page out of his book, so to speak, by talking. His earlier episodes, he would read a book too every week, and then talk about the book. Probably usually had to do with war, battle, motivation, and then the last 5 minutes he would kind of sum it all up and give his like parting thoughts, which was really just some badass 5-minute talk that could be a fucking YouTube motivational viral video in itself. So I'll try to like end these with some positive words, which I think I just said. So that's where I don't want to force it, but I do want to leave you guys with these podcast episodes with the actions you can take. I'm all about taking action. You'll hear some Gary Vee in me as well, but things that you can do, things that you can take away from this podcast immediately, and not just hear a bunch of ramble. And without rambling, I'm going to try to give you guys as much content without just kind of talking about nonsense. And so I hope you guys have taken a lot from this, and you really, whoever you're with, the people you interact with. I know as a music producer, especially, we are isolated people, and we spend a lot of time alone, and especially with social media now, we're spending even more time alone. And with the phenomenon that's going on this year especially, and with the trends that are coming on with suicide, I know that this is going to become a bigger issue. And I want to prevent this as much as I can. And so I'm glad I started out with this topic, because it's a major issue. It needs to be addressed now. And I'm going to keep digging. I'm going to keep digging. Next week, we're going to talk about manic depressive disorder, and how mental illness affects creativity in a negative way and in a positive way. That's something I've always thought about. Like, if you're like, like some of the greatest art was created by struggle and angst, right? And so if you're to kind of subdue that in a creative, in an artist, are they going to create the same amazing art? A lot of my favorite art was created out of anger and angst and sadness. And if we were to have treated that sadness and anger, would have that art have come about? Like, how do you interpret that? Like, is it necessary for good creative art? And so I'm going to go into that next week, and just keep diving in. And if you guys have any ideas for topics, please send them to me, and I'm going to keep coming with the fire. That's my whole outlook on everything, is to really light a fire under people that I engage with, and really open their eyes to what they can do, their potential. There's so much human potential that is never realized ever in people's lives. They take it to their graves, never realizing that potential. And I want us all to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And with that, I will see you guys next week. Get fired up.